my name is Carrie, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in the month of May. In May, I was still recovering a little bit from my reading slump, but it went a lot better than I expected, which is something I am pretty thankful for. Now let's start talking about these books by looking at the statistics. I read 4 books in the month of May, and only about 740-ish pages, which is pretty low, but it's about quality, not quantity, so it's okay. I read 2 ebooks and 2 audiobooks. I read 1 book that I owned, 2 books that were from the library, and 1 book that was a digital ARC. In terms of the author background, there is 1 author who is Indigenous from the Muskogee Nation, 1 author who has a Swana background, and 2 authors who were white. My average rating for the month was a 3.75, and I did have 2 DNFs that I will pretty briefly talk about. The first one was The Spell Shop by Beth Durst, and this was my 3rd time attempting to read this book, and I finally realized that I just don't enjoy this. I made it about like 75% of the way into the story this time, and I just wasn't enjoying it. I found the story to be pretty boring. I think this one kind of missed the mark on cozy fantasy because like in the cozy fantasy that I have read, there is still like a very clear goal or like plot that is moving the story forward, and this one felt aimless for a little bit too long. Even though I really did like the characters and I thought they were very endearing, there was just nothing really happening in the story for way too much of it for me. The other one was actually supposed to be the May book club read for my in-person book club, and that was All the Way to the River by Gilbert. Now, I should have honestly known better, but I don't get to pick all of the books for book club. It is voted on by members, and there were a lot of people that wanted to read this one. We read both fiction and nonfiction. I just don't really jive with Gilbert's writing style. I have previously read Eat, Pray, Love and just found it to be okay. I'd heard obviously a lot of the rumors and like circulation and discussion around this book. And this is one where I don't really have any comments on the content because I really did not make it that far into the book to be able to comment on it. However, I tried both the ebook and the audiobook from my library, and I did not like either version of them. I don't like how it's written on the page. I don't like how it's narrated. And this just is not one that I could get into. I think I made it like between 10 to 20% into it. And both times I just could not read this book. It felt like this very weird blend of genres that just didn't make sense, and there were these vignettes. Yeah, it just wasn't for me, and honestly, most of the people from book club ended up DNFing this, so I don't even feel bad that I did it as well. I just realized I think that I missed mentioning the countries that I read from. I only read from 4 different countries: the United States, Canada, the Muskogee Nation, and then also Palestine. So that wraps up my statistics and also my DNFs now. Now let's look at the books in order from the ones I liked the least to the ones I liked the most. And there was actually only 1 book that I didn't really like this month, and that was The Year of Less by Cait Flanders. I gave this 2 stars because I do not think that this book's synopsis describes what this book is about. This book is pitched as a practical guide for shopping less and consuming less and just living in a year of acquiring less things. This book is a memoir about 1 year in the author's life. And it was coincidentally this year that she decided she wasn't going to buy as many things. And I say coincidentally because even though that is like the marketing of the book, that is such a small part of this story. Most of this story is about her childhood, failed relationships, struggles with alcoholism, and her parents' divorce. There is very little in this book that is actually about this change of shopping less and what happened to her, how she did this. There's almost no practical information for someone who's entering this, expecting it to be a guide to this kind of lifestyle. I do think there were some things that were relatable in this, especially this part where she talks about wanting to become sober so that not only could she have like healthier relationships with people, both in terms of romantic and friendships, but also that she could change her types of social circumstances and improve her physical health. There's a part of that that's about creating meaningful friendships outside of alcohol, and I definitely think that that is really important, and I think that that was a really strong point that she had in this book. However, it's just not really about what it's pitched to be, and I really strongly dislike that. After that one, I had a book that was pretty good, and that was She Had Some Horses by Harjo. I love Joy Harjo's writing. I think that there's never going to be a book of hers that I will rate pretty low because I just love her poetry style. This one was beautiful as always in terms of the writing, and I was kind of surprised how much I enjoyed this because I'm actually a very anti-horse girl personality type. I'm not really big into horses. I'm kind of afraid of them, and so A lot of these poems were actually about horses, not just the animal themselves, but like their significance to the poet and her culture, and also the kind of connections that we have to the world and the animals that coexist with us. There were some beautiful aspects to this about the journey of womanhood, and I think those really lovely reflections on womanhood and relationships, those were the poems that really impacted me the most. There were some that definitely hit the mark for me or just didn't resonate as much with me, which happens in all types of poetry collections. But for this one, I landed on about 3 out of 5 stars. I ended the month on a really great note for the last 2 books that I read. Both of them were 5-star reads, and both of them are definitely tied for my favorites of the month. The first one is Fish in a Tree by Lynda Mullaly Hunt. And this is such a delightful read. It's a middle grade book about a young girl named Allie who is experiencing dyslexia and is not really getting the support that she needs, and so she feels very isolated, she feels very unintelligent. It's about this journey with a new teacher that comes in, with her discovering ways to cope with her dyslexia and to be successful in ways that are tangible for her instead of just her mom telling her that, you know, she's a really great kid. I loved this book. I think it has a beautiful messaging behind it, and I really think that it should be required reading, especially for teachers of all age levels, because there are so many students that have dyslexia who do not realize it or who do not understand that there are strategies and resources that we as teachers should know to be able to help them. I really, really loved this. I think it's a beautiful book, and it's definitely also something that I think is really well done for the age level that it is meant to be marketed to, because as I said, it's middle grade. This is my favorite thing about middle grade books, is that oftentimes they cover these really serious themes or these really difficult topics for kids to understand, but they make them so accessible to them and show them that these things are okay and they're normal. Yet this was a wonderful example of that. I am gonna stop my gushing there because I could truly go on forever about how much I love this book. But if you have a younger reader in your life, or if you're an educator, I think this is an absolute must read. The last book that I read was another poetry collection, and that was 70,000 by Lenna Jawdat. This is a collection reflecting on the 70,000 books that were destroyed during the Nakba. The poet attempts to kind of reckon with the actual accounting of that number. So in this collection, there are the poems themselves, and then there are also pages and pages of her physically writing out 70,000. So this was a really experimental poetry form that I think worked really well in conveying such a interesting metaphor to the reader of how do you actually conceptualize 70,000 of something? Because that's something the poet herself is really grappling with throughout this. But it also feels so unique to me in the way that there's this really experimental nature to the way that these poems are comprised on the page, the way that they're ordered, the kind of symbolism of the pages of counting to 70,000. There is such a depth and nuance that is conveyed to the reader, and I think that it is very obvious to see both the poet's passion for this project, but also the way she is trying to explain to the reader the real lived reality of what this means. I think that this type of collection perfectly explained what the poet wanted the reader to take away from this. And I don't think that means that it was heavy-handed. I actually think the opposite. I think that it's really forcing the reader to do the work, to understand, to deconstruct here. And I really liked that aspect to this collection. This reminded me a lot of Ghost of by Diana Quay Nguyen. And in some ways, I think that's maybe just because of the different ways that the poems were structured. It reminded me of the ways that she also experimented with this. It was also just a collection that felt similarly to Ghost of because of the way that it reminded me of the things that we can do with poetry and the things that I don't often see in collections. So this is definitely a poet that I'm going to keep my eye out for because this was her debut collection, so I can't wait to see what she does in the future because this is definitely a favorite for me. That wraps up all the books that I read in the month of May. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these books or hear about what you have been reading, so please let me know. Thank you so much for watching this video and happy reading. Bye!